Hello, everybody, and welcome to Chloethedev Unfiltered. I'm going to be doing another paper review today, or at least starting one. The paper is not very long, actually, less than 40 pages, but I always ramble on and go through tangents, and so who knows how long this will take me. My paper reviews aren't really full-on reviews. I'm just reading the paper for myself. But if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to comment them. I usually try my best to at least be able to see the comments somewhat. So if someone leaves a comment, I will be able to go back and forth between the paper and the comment section. Aside from that, I'm gonna just get into it. This paper came out in July of last year, so it's it's been out for a while. I'm sure there's been updates to it, but I've been going through the Near YouTube series. They have a YouTube instructional series about Near, and so I felt like going through the consensus protocol that Near was built on top of would help me understand the chain better. So that's like the context of the video or the live stream, what I'm doing. My dog's eating away and being distracting and cute. And it's Halloween week. So I got my costume on. Sorry, I'm a unicorn. I got like a little ETH event, Ethereum event tonight. So I'm all dressed up, my little unicorn costume, and my puppy has the same unicorn costume, so it's really cute. Okay, so we're gonna start with sharding basics. So that should be basic for any. So it's kind of like talking, I guess, what's going to be happening in phase 1 and 2 of Ethereum, or I guess phase 2 of Ethereum is going into sharding. So a lot of this information is what I probably haven't gone over yet. In previous papers, like the Ghost paper and the Casper paper, don't really go through sharding yet. And so I'm really excited to kind of go through Nightshade as a lot of new information here, I'm sure. Introduction. It is well known that Ethereum, the most used general purpose blockchain at the time of this writing, can only process less than 20 transactions per second on the main chain. This limitation, coupled with the popularity of the network, leads to high gas prices, the cost of executing a transaction on the network, that's what gas prices are, and long confirmation times. Despite the fact that at the time of this writing, a new block is produced approximately every 10 to 20 seconds, the average time it actually takes for a transaction to be added to the blockchain is 1.2 minutes, and this is a problem. And this is according to Ethereum Gas Station. Low throughput, high prices, and high latency all make Ethereum not suitable to run services that need to scale with adoption. And this is what this paper is talking about. Although, Ethereum is, again, it's a blockchain just like anything else, and Ethereum can upgrade, and other blockchains can come out and upgrade. And so, in my opinion, I'm comparing this to Ethereum 2 and what I consider Ethereum 2 to be, and Near is a proof of concept in a lot of ways as well. Sorry. Yeah? Okay, come here. When Mika is needy, and she gets what she wants. 1 second, I gotta make sure. Okay. We are golden. Okay, Meeks, can I read now? Okay. Okay, the main reason for Ethereum low throughput is that every node in the network needs to process every single transaction. Developers have proposed many solutions to address the issue of throughput on the protocol level. These solutions can be mostly separated into those that delegate all the computation to a small set of powerful nodes, and those that have each node in the network only do a subset of the total amount of work. Okay? So these are like the two main solutions to try and do it. And so obviously what you don't want is a small subset of powerful nodes, because that leads to centralization, right? That small set of powerful nodes. You want to decentralize out that power. So an example of the former approach is Solana, that through careful low-level optimizations and GPU usage can reach hundreds of thousands simple payment transactions per second processed by each node in the system. So the way they do that is that, yes, every node has to process everything, but each node is highly powerful, which can be great for DeFi applications, because right now people trade with banking systems that are relatively centralized. And you look at a lot of, like the Australian stock market, I think, moved to like a decentralized system that uses 3 nodes. That's one of the most robust systems in the world for multiple ledgers in a stock market. And so, or I wouldn't say one of the most robust systems in the world. I'd say it's one of the most unique systems using cryptography and blockchain, and that adds a lot of overhead right there. But should I add some security? Algorand, Space Mesh, Thunder all fit into the former category, building various improvements in the consensus. Go ahead, baby. Oh, no space? Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Oh, you want me to pet you or you want to go? I'm trying to read this. Okay. Improvements in the consensus and the structure of the blockchain itself to run more transactions than Ethereum, but still bounded by what a single, albeit very powerful machine can process. And this is kind of the issue with, yeah, okay, I'm sorry for stopping. This is the issue with a lot of these blockchains is that no matter what you do, in my opinion, and if you focus on having a few very powerful nodes, you're going to run into overhead issues. You're going to run into overhead issues. So the later approach, in which the work is split among all the participating nodes, is called sharding. This is how Ethereum Foundation currently plans to scale Ethereum. At the time of this writing, the spec is not finalized yet. The most recent spec can be found here. You got the Ethereum 2 specs, which obviously have been worked on a lot since this paper came out. Near protocol is also built on sharding. The Near team, which includes several, Jeez, Mika, you good? They've got, memSQL engineers responsible for building sharding, cross-shard transactions, and distributed joins, as well as 5x Googlers, whatever that means, has significant industry expertise in building distributed systems. Okay, so they've got people who come from a diverse, or a high-level background of experts to build this system, right? And I think one of the benefits is that, I don't think sharding is an experimental. Yeah. Sharding is an experimental concept in general. But with Ethereum has to also make sure that the entire state of Ethereum is secure and move to this new upgrade of sharding. Whereas a new blockchain can just kind of try and implement sharding off the bat, which might be quicker. Are you going to bite me? I think she actually might bite me. You're going to see how people think my dog is normal, and she's very cute. But she does have anxiety issues, and she does get a lot of, I don't know. So she does bite a lot, but that's okay. Let's see. Near protocol. See, yeah, she wants to bite when she doesn't get pet. Near protocol is also built on sharding. The Near team, This document outlines the general approach to blockchain sharding, the major problems that need to be overcome, including state validity and data availability problems, and presents Nightshade, the solution Near protocol is built upon that addresses those issues. Very cool. So a lot of the basics of this paper aren't really needed to understand we need to understand Nightshade, but you could just, if you wanted to read this paper yourself, you could just skip ahead, go to Nightshade and learn about Nightshade specifically, but I will be going through the entire paper so that I can go through the basics of sharding and all the blockchain stuff. My dog. But yes, going through the live with me is not usually worth it. Go read it yourself. I'm just reading this myself because now is when I read it. I did not go skate with my dog yet. Usually I skateboard with her every day. And so she's very hyper today. Very, very hyper. Okay, yes. Okay, sharding basics. Let's start with the simplest approach to sharding. In this approach, instead of running one blockchain, we will run multiple and call each such blockchain a shard. So all you really have is multiple blockchains running in parallel. Each shard will have its own set of validators. Here and below, we use the generic term validator to refer to participants that verify transactions and produce blocks, either by mining, such as proof of work, or via a voting-based. Are you going now? Oh, I have to scratch your butt. Okay. Cool. Good to know. Or via a voting-based mechanism. For now, let's assume that the shards never communicate with each other. This design, though simple, is sufficient to outline some initial major challenges in sharding. So I think this might be what you get in phase 1 of Ethereum. I can't remember specifically, where you get shards that can't communicate, or maybe, oh no, you don't get shard. Wait, I don't know. In phase 2, you get transactions. So, or who knows, or withdrawals. I can't even remember. Honestly, all the phases, in my opinion, are quite confusing to try and separate them out. But what? What is going on? Why are you biting me? I love you. Okay, so validator participation and beacon chains, and we have some nice little graphics too. Say that the system compromises 10 shards. The first challenge is that with each shard having its own validators, each shard is now 10 times less secure than the entire chain. Okay, so yeah. If a non-sharded chain with X validators decides to hard fork into a sharded chain and splits X validators across 10 shards, each shard now only has X over 10 validators. So you've distributed out the security across 10 validators, which is making each shard less secure. And corrupting one shard only requires corrupting 5.1% of the total number of validators instead of 51% like it would take in proof of work, or if you just use a general, like, you know, highest weight wins with all your validators. Yeah? Yeah? Oh, I know. Okay, I'm going to change. Can I scroll down? Okay, which brings us to the second point. Who chooses validators for each shard, right? Which with the committees in ETH2. Controlling 5.1 of validators is only damaging if all those 5.1 of validators are on the same shard. Very true. If validators can't choose which shard they get to validate in, a participant controlling 5.1 of the validators is highly unlikely to get all the validators in the same shard, heavily reducing their ability to compromise the system. Almost all sharding designs today rely on some sort of randomness to assign validators to shards. So yeah, in Ethereum, you've got, oh my gosh, your randomness to assign okay, you're gonna ruin my outfit. Committees and validators. Randomness on blockchain on itself is a very challenging topic and is out of scope for this document. Agreed, but Ethereum 1, at least that blockchain, has randomness. And I think the really cool part of that is that potentially Near does have a bridge to Ethereum. And so potentially the same, like, let's say Vdo, the verifiable delay function to provide randomness from Starkware on Ethereum. Who knows? Maybe you can just port that onto Near as well and just use it there for Near randomness. Who knows? Anyways, for now, let's assume there's a source of randomness we can use. We will cover validators assignment in more detail in section 2. Although I'm assuming you could just have all the Near validators run some sort of start computation as well. Although I don't think there's very many nodes in Near, which is my point. I think they're trying to decentralize it out, but it's not there yet. Both randomness and validator assignment require computation that is not specific to any particular shard. For that computation particularly, all existing designs have a separate blockchain that is tasked with performing operations necessary for the maintenance of the entire network. So on Ethereum, you have the beacon chain. I would assume that would be that. And then you have the shards on top holding the state. Oh my gosh. Besides generating random numbers and assigning validators to the shards, these operations also include receiving updates from shards and taking snapshots of them, processing stakes and slashing in proof-of-stake systems, and rebalancing shards when that feature is supported. Such chain is called a beacon chain in Ethereum. Yeah, a relay chain in Polkadot, and the Cosmos hub in Cosmos. Throughout this document, we will refer to such chain as a beacon chain, which is good because that'll help me understand it for Ethereum. The existence of the beacon chain brings us to the next interesting topic, the quadratic sharding. Oh my gosh, finally she's off to play with something else. Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah? I think we're going to have to go out and play soon. Yeah, because she's going crazy. Anyways. Some water. Whenever I sit down and start reading a paper, I start yawning. Sharding is often advertised as a solution that scales infinitely with the number of nodes participating in the network operation. While it is in theory possible to design such a sharding solution, any solution that has the concept of a beacon chain doesn't have infinite scalability. To understand why, note that the beacon chain has to do some bookkeeping computations such as assigning validators to shards or snapshotting shard chain blocks. That is proportional to the number of shards in the system. So that work is proportional to the number of shards. Since the beacon chain is itself a single blockchain, with computation bounded by the computational capabilities of the nodes operating it, the number of shards is naturally limited. What? What's going on? I'm trying. Can I? No? I need to pet you. Okay, I need to pet you at all times. Sounds good. Here we are. However, the structure of a sharded network does bestow a multiplicative effect on any improvements to its nodes. Consider the case in which an arbitrary improvement is made to the efficiency of nodes in the network, which will allow them faster transaction processing times. If the node operating the network, including the nodes in the beacon chain, become 4 times... Oh my god! I love you, Mika, but like... Oh my... So this is what happens when I don't take you on a skateboard run. I'm gonna take you skateboarding, eh? You go crazy. I'm gonna take you later. I was washing my jacket, so it was in the washing machine. And so it's out now, so I might have to take you now. But I'd like to at least get through the first chapter. Can I do that? Please. Is that all right? Mika, sit. Good girl. Now can I please get to this? Okay. Okay. If the nodes operating the network, including the nodes in the beacon chain, become 4 times faster, then each shard will be able to process 4 times more transactions, and the beacon chain will be able to maintain 4 times more shards. The throughput across the system will increase by the factor of 4 times 4, which equals 16, thus the name quadratic sharding. So they're saying there is a limit to how many shards a beacon chain can hold, but if you can operate the beacon chain and the shards faster, then it should be quadratic in terms of performance. Anyways, it is hard to provide an accurate measurement for how many shards are viable today, but it is unlikely that any foreseeable future the throughput needs of blockchain users will outgrow the limitations of quadratic sharding. I would agree with that. Even Ethereum, I think they're only talking about using like 4 shards now or 12 shards. Where before they're like, oh, we're going to use 64 shards. And they're like, okay, we probably won't even need that many shards in the beginning. We'll probably be fine with... Ow, Kate. Okay, you gotta chill. You gotta chill, Mika. You're fed. You're watered. I took you for 2 walks today. You're biting my chair. You're biting my chair. I need you to chill. I know that you're hyper. I tried picking you up. Okay, you won't let me pick you up. I'll pet you if you want. Okay. I'll pet you, alright? You gonna chill for a little bit? Okay. Okay. Yeah. State sharding. Up until now, we haven't defined very well what exactly is and is not separated when a network is divided into shards. Specifically, nodes in the blockchain perform three important tasks. Not only do they process transactions, they also relay validated transactions and completed blocks to other nodes and store the state and the history of the entire network ledger. Each of these three tasks impose a growing requirement on the nodes operating the network. Mika, just let me scroll down, please. Oh, thank you. She's going to get her toys. She has so many toys. She might actually go play with one. Okay. So 1, the necessity to process transactions requires more compute power with the increased number of transactions being processed. That makes sense. 2, the necessity to relay transactions and blocks requires more network bandwidth with the increased number of transactions being relayed. That also makes sense. The necessity to store data requires more storage as the state grows. Importantly, unlike the processing power and network, the storage requirement grows even if the transactions rate remains constant. And this is kind of frustrating for a lot of networks because even if you hash all the data into consistent sized bytes, every block still has data. It still has block headers. You still need to be able to get to that data somehow. And therefore, as the blockchain continues to grow, so does that storage data that you need to store somewhere and store that state, which is, I think, an issue of every blockchain. And why I think that every blockchain, for the most part, it needs to be somewhat interconnected because if there becomes a blockchain that becomes really good at holding state, then you could have your data availability and your state held there, and maybe your transaction throughput here, and maybe your base level of computation on Ethereum maybe, and then your reserves of storage of funds on Bitcoin, and then moving those funds to Ethereum, and then using. So there's lots of use case for all the interconnectability of blockchain. It's taken so long to get here, but it's so amazing that we're here. And all these blockchains interacting, and I think is the future that we're going to be in. From the above list, it might appear that the storage requirement would be the most pressing, since it is the only one that is being increased over time, even if the number of transactions per second doesn't change. But in practice, the most pressing requirement today is the compute power. The entire state of Ethereum, as of this writing, is 100 gigabytes. It's more than that now for sure. I know that even the Turbo Geth, I think is like 400 gigabytes, which I guess is the most reasonable. But if you go for an archive node, you're looking at 6-7 terabytes or something like that. No gatherings permitted this weekend. So my residents just emailed me saying no gatherings permitted this weekend, because it's Halloween. The entire state of Ethereum, which is easy manageable by most of the nodes. 100 gigs, I can get. I got a 500 gig SSD for like $120 from Canada Computers. So yes, 100 gigs. No, it was 1 terabyte. 1 terabyte SSD from Canada Computers for $100. So very manageable for 100 gigabytes. But the number of transactions Ethereum can process is around 20. Orders of magnitude less than what is needed for many practical use cases. Zilliqa is the most well-known project that shards processing, but not storage. Sharding of processing is an easier problem because each node has the entire state, meaning that contracts can freely invoke other contracts and read any data from the blockchain. Some careful engineering is needed to make sure updates from multiple shards updating the same parts of the state do not conflict. In regards to Zilliqa, in those regards, Zilliqa is taking a relatively simplistic approach, and I guess we can look at it into more detail here in this paper, but that's too much. Digging into Zilliqa right now is a bit much. While sharding of storage without sharding of processing was proposed, it is extremely uncommon. Thus, in practice, sharding of storage, or state sharding, almost always implies sharding of processing and sharding of network. Practically, under state sharding, the nodes in each shard are building their own blockchain that contains transactions that affect only the local part of the global state that is assigned to that shard. So this is where this works very well, and I think the issue would be is that you can't really have validators leaving the network or going down. This pretty much only works when nodes are pretty much near 100% uptime all the time. So you'd have to have really, really high penalties for being inactive, I would assume. Therefore, the validators in the shard only need to store their local part of the global state and only execute. And as such, only relay transactions that affect the part of the state. This partition literally reduces the requirement on all compute power, storage, and network bandwidth, but introduces new problems such as data availability and cross-shard transactions, both of which we cover below. Very cool. The sharding model we described so far is not a very useful one, because if individual shards cannot communicate with each other, they are no better than multiple independent blockchains. Agreed. Even today, when sharding is not available, there's a huge demand for interoperability between various blockchains. Very true. Let's for now only consider simple payment transactions where each participant has an account on exactly one shard. If one wishes to transfer money from one account to another within the same shard, the transaction can be processed entirely by the validators in that shard. If, however, Alice that resides on shard number 1 wants to send money to Bob, who is on shard 2, neither validators on shard 1, they won't be able to credit Bob's account, nor the validators on shard 2, because they won't be able to validate the debt Alice's account, can process the entire transaction. There are two families of approaches to cross-shard transactions. You have synchronous, which I think would be a lot more difficult to try and figure out. But synchronous would be whenever a cross-shard transaction needs to be executed, the blocks in multiple shards that contain state transition related to the transaction get all produced at the same time, and the validators of multiple shards collaborate on executing such transactions. While that sounds like there's ways to go down that road. It seems like you might be able to get finality easier. It just seems like you might make a mistake and then you just made a mistake on the blockchain. Whereas asynchronous seems like it would be a lot more simple to, not simple, but more straightforward to implement, because you could just have proofs that the funds only transfer once. And I think Near uses asynchronous transfer. I was watching a video yesterday about like single block cross-shard transactions. Asynchronous. A cross-shard transaction that affects multiple shards is executed in those shards asynchronously. The credit shard executing its half once it has sufficient evidence that the debt shard has executed its portion. So I like this because you are getting some evidence. So someone sends something, then you get evidence it was sent, and then you send the other part. And yes, it will take 2 transactions, but this should also kind of help offset a little bit of the congestion in the network. So it might take a minute or 3 seconds or 30 seconds, depending on how the congestion is on those specific shards. I think gas fees come into play there, I suppose, as well. This approach tends to be more prevalent due to its simplicity and ease of coordination. The system is today proposed in Cosmos, Ethereum Serenity, Near, Cadena, and others. A problem with this approach lies in that if blocks are produced independently, there's a non-zero chance that one of the multiple blocks will be orphaned. Very possible, thus making the transaction only partially applied. Consider figure 2 that depicts 2 shards, both of which encountered a fork, and a cross-shard transaction that was recorded in blocks A and X prime correspondingly. If the chains A, if the chains A to B and V prime to X prime to Y prime to Z prime end up being canonical in their corresponding shards, the transaction is fully finalized. If A prime, B prime, A prime to B prime to C prime to D prime and Vx become canonical, then the transaction is fully abandoned, which is acceptable. So both of those seem acceptable. But if, for example, AB and Vx become canonical, then one part of the transaction is finalized and one is abandoned, creating an atomicity failure, which basically means you're trying to do a swap, like an atomic swap, but it fails. You just want to bite me, eh? You just want to like eat something. You're full of energy. You just want to eat everything. Like not food. She wants to like attack. It's okay though. We will cover how this problem is addressed in the proposed protocols in the second part, when covering changes to the fork choice rules and consensus algorithms proposed for sharded protocols. I'm guessing, yeah, the example is down here, so I'm going to go through it again in a second, but let's go through the notes first. Note that communication between chains is useful outside of sharded blockchains too. Interoperability between chains is a complex problem that many projects are trying to solve. So yeah, you have TBTC coming over from Bitcoin to Ethereum. You have Polkadot, Cosmos having their own interoperability stuff. And you have Near with their bridge, you have Matic with their Ethereum bridge, and you have a lot of Ethereum bridges, obviously. But however, and XDAI as well, I suppose, has a bridge. Okay, in sharded blockchains, the problem is somewhat easier since the block structure and consensus are the same across shards, and there's a beacon chain that can be used for coordination. In a sharded blockchain, however, all of the shard chains are the same, while in the global blockchains ecosystem, there are lots of different blockchains with different target use cases, decentralization, and privacy guarees. Okay. Building a system in which a set of chains have different properties but use sufficiently similar consensus and block structure and have a common beacon chain could enable an ecosystem of heterogeneous blockchains that have a working interoperable subsystem. And this is what I see in Ethereum. Exactly this. Such system is unlikely to feature validator rotation, but Ethereum does have validator rotation on the beacon chain as well. So some extra measures need to be taken to ensure security. Both Cosmos and Polkadot are effectively such systems. So I guess Cosmos and Polkadot don't have that validator shuffling because I guess random numbers and random generation is hard on chain, but the beacon chain does have the random assignment of validator, which is really cool. But I'm assuming Polkadot and Cosmos will add these things in after, I would assume. Let's see. She's being good right now, so I'm gonna keep going, and then it's only not even 2 o'clock yet. So I'll have to take her soon, probably for a walk. We're going to keep going for now. 1.5, Malicious Behavior. In this section, we'll review what adversarial behavior can malicious validators exercise if they manage to corrupt a shard. We will review classic approaches to avoiding corrupting shards in section 2.1. Malicious forks. A set of malicious validators might attempt to create a fork. Note that it doesn't matter if the underlying consensus is BFT or not. Wow. What does BFT stand for? Byzantine fault tolerant. Yeah. I know what it means. I just don't yeah. It doesn't matter if the underlying consensus is BFT or not. Corrupting sufficient number of validators will always make it possible to create a fork. It is sufficient. Yeah, it makes sense. If you have like 2/3 or more, even if it's Byzantine fault tolerant, if you have enough percent, yeah. If it is significantly more, it is significantly more likely for more than 50% of a single shard to be corrupted than for more than 50% of the entire network to be corrupted. That makes sense. As discussed in section 1.4, cross-shard transactions involve certain state changes in multiple shards, and the corresponding blocks in such shards that apply such state changes must either be all finalized, i.e. appear in the selected chains on their corresponding shards, or all be orphaned, not appear in the selected chains on their corresponding shards. Since generally the probability of shards being corrupted is not negligible, we can't assume that the forks won't happen even if a Byzantine consensus was reached among the shard validators, or many blocks were produced on top of the block with the state change. This problem has multiple solutions. The most common one being occasional cross-linking of the latest shard chain block to the beacon chain. The fork choice rule in the shard chains is then changed to always prefer the chain that is cross-linked and only apply shard-specific fork choice rule for that blocks that were published since the last cross-link. So that cross-linking seems to be one of the main difference for finality and justification and finality in Nightshade in differences to Ethereum. So they're saying the common solution to this problem is occasional cross-linking of the latest shard. So every once in a while you take the latest shard and you link it, I guess, to the beacon chain. The fork choice rule in the shard chains is then changed to always prefer the chain that is cross-linked. So you just randomly come up with this occasional. So it's saying you have occasional, I don't know how often, occasional finality, which Ethereum has as well. I guess it's the general explanation of what you do. They're saying you have occasional finality. They're not giving a specific of how you would do that. There's just a general application. So, Ghost and, Casper has their own applications. Ghost. Approving invalid blocks. A set of validators might attempt to create a block that applies the state transition function incorrectly. For example, starting with a state in which Alice has 10 tokens and Bob has 0 tokens, the block might contain a transaction that sends 10 tokens from Alice to Bob, but ends up with a state where Alice has 0 tokens and Bob has 1,000 tokens. So this on the left would be the valid state, 10 to 0 and 0 to 10, and invalid would be Bob all of a sudden having 100x the amount of supply of tokens that Bob is supposed to. In a classic non-sharded blockchain, such an attack is not possible, since all the participants in the network validate all the blocks, and the block with such an invalid state transition will be rejected by both other block producers and the participants of the network that do not create blocks. Even if the malicious validators continue creating blocks on top of such an invalid block faster than the honest block validators build the correct chain. Thus, having the chain with the invalid block being longer doesn't matter. So length of the chain does not matter. It's the heaviest chain that wins in a classic blockchain, whether it's proof of work or, I guess, proof of stake in phase 0. On the figure 4, in figure 4, there are 5 validators, 3 of whom are malicious. They created an invalid block A prime and then continued building new blocks on top of it. 2 honest validators discarded A prime as invalid and were building on top of the last valid block known to them, creating a fork. So here on the top is this malicious A prime, B prime, C prime, D prime, creating this malicious longer chain. And then you have this honest chain where you have less honest validators who are like, you know what, that other chain, we've validated it, it's not valid. So we haven't validated it, we've checked it, and it's not valid. We're going to build on this valid chain that we know from the best of our knowledge to be valid. Since there are fewer validators in the honest fork, the chain is shorter. However, the classic non-sharded blockchain in classic non-sharded blockchain, every participant that uses blockchain for any purpose is responsible for validating all the blocks they receive and recomputing the state. Thus, any person who has any interest in the blockchain would observe that A prime is invalid and thus immediately also discard the rest of that long chain. So all you really have to do is check A prime, A prime's invalid, the rest of it's invalid. You're not going to use that. Then you're going to look for the next longest chain, which would be A and B. I would assume. Blocks. Thus, any person, and that's taking A and B as the longest chain. Yes. In a sharded blockchain, however, no participant can validate all the transactions on all the shards, so they need to have some way to confirm that at no point in history of any shard of the blockchain, no invalid block was included. Note that unlike with forks, cross-linking to the beacon chain is not a sufficient solution. Since the beacon chain doesn't have the capacity to validate the blocks, it can only validate that a sufficient number of validators in that shard signed the block. As to such attested to its correctness. We will discuss solutions to this problem in section 2.2. That's going to be fun. State validity and data availability. The core idea in sharded blockchains is that most participants operating or using the network cannot validate blocks in all the shards. Makes sense? As such, whenever any participant needs to interact with a particular shard, they generally cannot download and validate the entire history of the shard. Yeah, so we're assuming that you're validating, but you cannot get the entire data of the shard, so what do? If we're assuming this. The partitioning aspect of sharding, however, raises a significant potential problem. Without downloading and validating the entire history of a particular shard, the participant cannot necessarily be certain that the state with which they intersect is the result of some valid sequence of blocks, and that such sequence of blocks is indeed the canonical chain of the shard. Basically, everyone that uses the network needs to be able to validate that their state is correct. A problem that doesn't exist in non-sharded blockchains, because in non-sharded blockchains, every full node can know every account state. We will first present a simple solution to this problem that has been proposed by many protocols, and then analyze how the solution can break and what attempts there have been to address it. Validators rotation. The naive solution is to state the naive solution to state validity is shown in figure 5. Let's say we assume that the entire system has on the order of thousands of validators, out of which no more than 20% are malicious or otherwise fail, such as by failing to become online or produce a block. So we're not differentiating here. Whether you're malicious or you're offline or you're doing something that's not conductive to the protocol, whatever the reason is, we're going to assume you're malicious. It's all malicious in this sense. Then if we sample 200 validators, the probability of more than a third of failing for practical purposes can be assumed to be 0. So yeah, it's just basically saying if your chance, just probability, probability. 1/3 is an important threshold. There is a family of consensus protocols called Bft Consensus Protocols, Byzantine fault tolerant protocols, that guarantee that for as long as fewer than 1/3 of participants fail, either by crashing or acting in some way that violates the protocol, then consensus will be reached. With the assumption of honest validator percentage, if the current set of validators in a shard provides us with some block, the naive solution assumes that the block is valid and that it is built on what the validators believe to be the canonical chain of that shard when they started validating. The validators learned the canonical chain from the previous set of validators who, by the same assumption, built on top of the block which was the head of the canonical chain before that. So you're just assuming that everyone's following the same rules every time, and as long as you follow the heaviest weight and everyone's valid, then we're just going to keep being good. By introduction, the entire chain by induction, sorry, discrete mathematics. Yeah, I need to go through more of my discrete mathematics stuff. I've been slacking. The entire chain is valid, and since no set of validators at any point produced forks, the naive solution is also certain that the current chain is the only chain in the shard. See figure 6 for visualization. So this is the visualization. A blockchain with each block finalized via Bft consensus. On the right, you have Genesis block. You are on the left, and you're going to go from U to the Genesis block and make sure that you continue looking back to make sure that all the blocks that you check are all trusted. Okay, the simple solution doesn't work if we assume that validators can be corrupted adaptively, which is not an unreasonable assumption. Adaptively corrupting a single shard in a system with 1,000 shards is significantly cheaper than corrupting the entire system. Not necessarily, well, yes, that is true. That's why you need validators shuffling through. Therefore, the security of the protocol decreases linearly with the number of shards. That part I 100% agree with. No reason to have a bunch of shards. I think having like 2, 4, 8, 32, not 32, too many shards. I think even 8 to 16 shards would be more than enough for Ethereum even in the medium to long term. Just make the beacon chain larger and larger as time goes on, or more computationally intensive. To have certainty in the validity of a block, you must know that at any point in history, no shard in the system has a majority of validators colluding. With adaptive adversaries, we no longer have such certainty because an adversary can start being trustworthy and doing things according to the consensus algorithm, and then in a year they can be malicious, or they, so any node can change over time. Okay. As discussed in section 1.5, colluding validators can exercise two basic malicious behaviors. They can create forks, and they can produce invalid blocks. Malicious forks can be addressed by blocks being cross-linked to the beacon chain that is generally designed to have significantly higher security than the shard chains. So that should be helpful. And also producing invalid blocks, however, is a significantly more challenging problem to tackle. And then in Ethereum too, I think in the Gasper paper, or I can't remember which, I think the economic review paper, they were talking about how, you have this attack vector where if you produce invalid blocks at a certain time, you can get the nodes after you to also, attest to those blocks. And that's why having really, really quick block times and stuff like that wouldn't really work for most nodes. But for having a specific high-powered nodes, it would work. But then again, that reduces decentralization. So, state validity. Consider figure 7 on which shard number 1 is corrupted and a malicious actor produces invalid block B. Suppose in this block B, 1,000 tokens were minted out of thin air on Alice's account. So Alice is being very bad on shard number 1 in block B. The malicious actor then produces valid block C in a sense that all transactions to C are applied correctly on top of B, obfuscating the invalid block of B. So basically, there's block A, which would be correct. You have block B, which is malicious. You have block C, which is correct. And you're trying to hide that block B was invalid. And initiates a cross-shard transaction to shard 2. Oh no, that transfers these 1,000 tokens to Bob's account. So now Alice and Bob might even be the same person on different shards, trying to attack on one shard and move the economic activity in the shard. That's kind of how, an attacker recently attacked on DeFi and moved those earnings back to Bitcoin. So now you're already seeing how attacks on one shard or one chain can be used to move economic assets to another shard or chain. From this moment, the improperly created tokens reside on an otherwise completely valid blockchain in shard 2, because shard 2 is not overtaken or corrupted. Some simple approaches to tackle this problem are, so, I'm getting tired now. How long has this video been going? Whenever I start reading newspapers, the time just goes, and I should take Mika out for a skate, even though she is probably sleeping now. Okay, it's only been about 50 minutes. I'm gonna get at least an hour in, and then I'm probably gonna go out and take the doggy out because she deserves a nice little skate too. Okay, let's look at the diagram for a bit longer. But anyways, so this is figure 7, a cross-shard transaction from a chain that has an invalid block. For validators, a shard number 2 to validate the block from which the transaction is initiated. This won't work even in the example above, since block C appears to be completely valid. Ugh. For validators in shard 2 to validate some large number of blocks preceding the block from which the transaction is initiated. Naturally, for any number of blocks n validated by the receiving shard, the malicious validators can create n plus 1 valid blocks on top of the invalid blocks they produce. Okay. Some simple approaches to tackle this problem are, so you're saying that validators on shard 2 that are not malicious should validate the block. Oh yeah, that makes sense. So if C appears to be valid, validate the block from where all the transactions originate from. So that would be block B. And then the second one is saying, so shard 2, the validators here have to validate some large number of blocks. So now we're saying number 2 doesn't seem to be as helpful because, yeah, they're saying that the attackers can mine some arbitrary long number of blocks on top. But even still with number 2, they're saying that these two solutions won't work. Anyways, a promising idea to resolve this issue would be to arrange shards in an undirected graph in which each shard is connected to several other shards and only allow cross-shard transactions between neighboring shards. That's not, too bad. This is how Vlad Zamfir's sharding essentially works. I don't even know what that is. I gotta look into that. And similar idea is used in Cadena's chain web. Okay, interesting. If a cross-shard transaction is needed between shards that are not neighbors, such transaction is routed through multiple shards. You have some sort of routing, which maybe could add some sort of an anonymity too, if you wanted to pay for that. Like pay for anonymity by just routing back to yourself through a bunch of shards. It'd be kind of cool. Consider a figure below with 10 shards, each having 4 neighbors and no 2 shards requiring more than 2 hops for a cross-shard communication shown in figure 8. Shard number 2 is not only validating its own blockchain, but also blockchains of all the neighbors, including shard 1. So if a malicious actor on shard 1 is attempting to create an invalid block B, then it already isn't going to work out because you try and build block C on top of it and initiate a cross-shard transaction. You might be able to build block C, but the cross-shard transaction will not go through since shard 2 knows that shard 1 is malicious. It's also very good because it adds some sort of security that you have other shards that know when one shard is being attacked or malicious things are happening. And this is just an example of it. So what I was thinking is that a cool system here is that if you had blockchains connected like this, you could just have routing between many shards and produce fees that can be earned by certain shards. So a certain shard could earn fees by routing traffic through it and earning like anonymity fees. So I want to route through 35 different shards and come back and obfuscate my holdings and come to these 3 shards. And you pay fees as those shards execute the computation, but you'd be able to get anonymity based on how many ever shards you have. An invalid cross-shard transaction in chain web-like system will get detected. While corrupting a single shard is no longer a viable attack, corrupting a few shards remains a problem. On Figure 9, an adversary corrupting both Shard 1 and 2 successfully executes a cross-shard transaction on Shard 3. So it's kind of like they're sandwiching sandwiching without really putting bread together. But here you have Shard 1 and Shard 2 are able to attack on Shard 3 because they are linked in that way. So it also depends, you get added security in this way, but you could remove some of those links or increase them depending on what kind of trade-offs you wanted to have in your blockchain. An invalid cross-shard transaction in chain web systems that will not get detected. Shard number 3 validates all the blocks in Shard 2, but not in Shard 1, and has no way to detect the malicious block. Again, because the malicious block happens in Shard 1, then gets sent to Shard 2, which normally shouldn't accept it, but because Shard 2 is also malicious, it accepts that malicious shard and accepts it normally, builds upon it normally, and then it'll get accepted by Shard 3. There are two major directions for properly solving state validity. Fisherman and cryptographic proofs of computation. So let's see what Fisherman is. The idea behind the first approach is the following. Whenever a block header is communicated between chains for any purpose, such as cross-linking to the beacon chain or a cross-shard transaction, there's a period of time during which any honest validator can provide a proof that the block is invalid. So this Fisherman is kind of like an exit game, I suppose, and the idea is you provide this period of time for honest validators to do some sort of computation and be able to basically be like watchtowers looking out for dishonest nodes or something like that. There are various constructions that enable very succinct proofs that the blocks are invalid. So the communication overhead for the receiving nodes is way smaller than for the receiving of a full block. So there is a system in place here in this to make sure that the communication can be heard. With this approach, for as long as there's at least one honest validator in the shard, the system is secure. So this is kind of the data availability that I would think is similar to what Starkware is using. And the whole idea is that data availability can be guaranteed as long as you have one valid node. And so I always like that because my idea is I want to be that node then. Because that means yes, I can get taken over or whatever, but as long as you are that node or you trust someone who's that node, then you should be okay. This is the dominant approach, besides pretending the problem doesn't exist among the proposed protocols today. This approach, however, has two major disadvantages. The challenge period needs to be sufficiently long for honest validators to recognize a block was produced, download it, fully verify it, and prepare the challenge if the block is invalid. So in Ethereum, they increased the slot times from like 6 seconds to 12 seconds. I think to allow for some of this overhead and some of this time that's needed. And second, the existence of the challenge protocol creates a new vector of attacks when malicious nodes spam with invalid challenges. Very true, but then if you challenge something saying something was invalid, there needs to be something that happens. Either someone gets slashed because something was actually invalid, or if you're just DDoSing the network, sending invalid challenges, then you should get slashed a little bit as well. You can't. You shouldn't be telling on someone if they're not doing anything wrong. So this is only a partial solution, as it might still be beneficial for the adversary to spam the system and burn the deposits with invalid challenges. For example, to prevent the valid challenge from an honest validator going through. These attacks are called grieving attacks. So someone might want to spam the network with invalid challenges to prevent a valid challenge to go through, because they might lose 32 ETH. I'm using ETH as an example. they might lose their 32 ETH stake, but then they might have attacked a shard and gained 1,000 ETH or 10,000 ETH, and it was worth that, or whatever that ratio is. And that's kind of where I think it's important to, to make sure you look out for this stuff, man. Section 3.7.2 is going to tell us a way to get around that. Very fun. Succinct, non-interactive arguments of knowledge. The second solution to multiple shard corruption is to use some sort of cryptographic constructions that allow one to prove that a certain computation, such as computing a block from the set of transactions, was carried out correctly. Such constructions do exist. For example, ZK snarks and ZK starks. So yeah, Starkware uses ZK starks, which are a lot cheaper on gas, from what I understand, and a lot more easy for blockchain use cases. And some are actively used in blockchain protocols today for privacy payments, most notably Zcash. I think Zcash uses Starks. I think the primary problem with such primitives is that they are notoriously slow to compute. For example, the Coda protocol that uses ZK snarks, specifically to prove that all the blocks in the blockchain are valid, said in one of the interviews that it could take 30 seconds per transaction to create a proof. That number is probably smaller from now, and I think Coda might be what is used on XDAI for Dark Forest. I'm not sure. If it is, then it's a lot slower than 3 seconds. I'm not 100% sure what Dark Forest uses to get. And I think they use Starks. I think I'm mistaken. I can't remember what they use. I heard it and I forgot it right after that. But I think Starks are a lot quicker in terms of verification time, prover time, and all that. Interestingly, a proof doesn't need to be computed by a trusted party, since the proof not only attests to the validity of the computation it is built for, but the validity of the proof itself. Thus, the computation of such proofs can be split among a set of participants with significantly less redundancy than would be necessary to perform some trustless computation. It also allows for the participants who compute the ZK snarks or ZK starks or any kind of cryptographic computation to run on special hardware without reducing the decentralization of the system. And this is, again, how you could have some sort of data availability outside of the network run by, specific networks, and have some sort of, what Starkware is doing pretty much. The challenges of ZK snarks besides performance are dependency on less research and less time-tested cryptographic primitives. This is true because snarks and starks are all pretty much new stuff. Toxic waste. ZK snarks depend on a trusted setup in which a group of people perform some computation and then discard the intermediate values of that computation. If all the participants of the procedure collude and keep the intermediate values, fake proofs can be created. I don't think of this as being a pretty large issue, because you could have a trusted setup with 1,000 individuals, and as long as one person in that setup was honest and completely destroys their proofs, you're fine. Because you could have some crazy random number that needs to be figured out to solve it. And I mean, as long as you have a few people in there that are using numbers that are completely derived randomly, you should be all right. In this, though, what I don't like is the whole idea of a trusted setup in general. In my opinion, it's the whole idea of things can't be upgraded. From what I understand, the Stark system allows for no trusted setup, which means you could enter or exit the general purpose computation. Secondly, what it means to me is that you just need one node within the data availability committee to be honest, and you should be fine. Extra complexity introduced into the system design, that's for sure. And ZK snarks only work for a subset of possible computations. So a protocol with a Turing-complete smart contract language wouldn't be able to use snarks to prove the validity of the chain. I have no clue how that works in terms of Starks or anything else. But in my opinion, cryptography or Starks or whatever you use doesn't need to be the be-all and end-all. It just needs to be a way for you to validify things or say things are true or not. 2.5, data availability. The second problem we touch upon is data availability. Generally, nodes operating in a particular blockchain are separated into two groups: full nodes, those that download every block and validate every transaction, and light nodes, those that only download block headers and use Merkle proofs for parts of the state and transactions they are interested in, as shown in Figure 11. So most people, if they run a node, run a light node. But if you really wanted to know everything that was going on in the blockchain, you need a full node. And so this is kind of how the Merkle tree of the blockchain would look like. And so now if a majority of full nodes collude, they can produce a block, valid or invalid, and send its hash to the light nodes, but never disclose the full content of the block. There are various ways they can benefit from it. For example, so this is going to give us an example of data availability issues. If you don't run a full node and you only run a light node, what might happen to you? So at the bottom, you have you as a light client only having a light node, and you have some previous validators. You have block A, you have the current validators who are malicious, and they have block B, and then the next validator. So validators here, I guess, are shifting through, but in this current snapshot where you're looking at you're looking at the chain, there is a current state of malicious validators. So there are 3 blocks. The previous block A is produced by honest validators. The current block B has validators colluding, and the next C will also be produced by honest validators. The blockchain is depicted in the bottom right corner. I don't know what that means. Oh, sorry, right here, A, B, and then C is the next block. I guess that's coming. You are a merchant. The validators of the current block B received block A from the previous validators, computed a block in which you receive money, and you send a header of that block with a Merkle proof of the state in which you have money. Okay? So you see this thing saying you received money. You say thank you, this is awesome, and you submit a proof saying you have the money, or a Merkle proof of a valid transaction that sends the money to you. Confident the transaction is finalized, you provide the service. So it's saying you receive the funds, you get a confirmation, you validate everything, and you give away the car, you sell the house, you give away the legal services, you provide the service. However, the validators never distribute the full content of the block B to anyone. So you're the only person that saw it, apparently. So you saw it, it looks good, you go, yay, I saw it, you distribute, but they didn't tell anyone else about it. As such, the honest validators of block C can't retrieve the block and are either forced to stall the system or build on top of A, depriving you as a merchant of money. So this is an issue because what's wrong here is that the entire block is correct, except for the fact that you got paid. So the rest of the validators are going to be like, okay, well, I can't find this one transaction, but it's not going to just stall out and not work. It's going to continue to work, and someone loses out on a little bit of money, and someone gets away with a little bit of extra service. When we apply the same scenario to sharding, the definitions of full and light node generally apply per shard. Validators in each shard download every block in that shard and validate every transaction in that shard, but other nodes in the system, including those that snapshot shard chain state into the beacon chain, only download the headers. So every node is only a light node for nodes they don't care about, I guess. So thus the validators in the shard are effectively full nodes for that shards, while other participants in the system, including the beacon node, operate as light nodes. So it kind of creates this system where everybody's a full node and everybody's a light node. It just depends on what you're looking at. So everyone gets to have a full state of their own state, and then also everyone has to kind of be a light node for everyone else. And I think that's a really good system to have. In Ethereum too, you kind of have the system where you try and have a lot of people running it's kind of more choice, I suppose, and I guess you have choice here as well. For the fisherman approach we discussed above to work, honest validators need to be able to download blocks that are cross-linked to the beacon chain. If malicious validators cross-linked a header of an invalid block or used it to initiate a cross-shard transaction, but never distributed the block, the honest validators have no way to craft the challenge. We will cover 3 approaches to address this problem that complement each other. Okay, so now we're going to make sure we're able to deal with this problem, and I'm going to stop before we get into Nightshade, and I'll probably go through Nightshade on Monday or something like that. I'm getting really tired and I want to take the dog out soon, so I'm just going to go through these few examples and then head out before we get into Nightshade. Proof of custody. The most immediate problem to be solved is whether a block is available once it is published. Okay. One proposed idea is to have so-called notaries that rotate between shards more often than validators whose only job is to download a block and attest to the fact that they were able to download it. They can be rotated more frequently because they don't need to download the entire state of the shard, unlike the validators who cannot be rotated frequently since they must download the state of the shard each time they rotate, shown on figure 13. The problem with this naive approach is that it is impossible to prove later whether the notary was or was not able to download the block. So a notary can choose to always attest that they were able to download the block without even attempting to retrieve it. So basically the notaries can cheat and be malicious. One solution to this is for notaries to provide some evidence or to stake some amount of tokens attesting that the block was downloaded. One such solution discussed here. So obviously you're just kind of creating a whole new system on top of the system to watch out for the system. Not the worst thing in the world. If this is how things need to get done, then that's great. There's an ETH research post here, aggregation friendly custody bond. I don't think something that complicated would be useful at the network layer, but possible. Eraser codes. When a particular light node receives a hash of a block, to increase the node's confidence that the block is available, it can attempt to download a few random pieces of the block. This is not a complete solution, since unless the light nodes collectively download the entire block, the malicious block producers can choose to withhold the parts of the block that were not downloadable by any light node, thus still making the block unavailable. One solution is to use a construction called erasure codes to make it possible to recover the full block, even if only some part of the block is available, as shown in figure 14. So figure 13 here is showing validators need to download state and thus cannot be rotated frequently. That's just showing that when a validator gets, so even in Ethereum, you have committees of validators that are rotated through, but I'm assuming there's no shards yet, first of all. But once you do get into shards, it's going to be a lot more computationally intensive as those validators switch between shards. Because to validate something, you need a state to validate. So, But with all these DeFi implementations, I think having this notary system could be viable. I just think it adds a lot more complexity and a lot more attack surfaces to the chain. Okay, so this is a Merkle tree built on top of erasure coded data. And I guess I think this is a potential good idea just to make sure, as a backup, just to make sure you can always recover a full block, even if only some of the block is available. That would be great. Both Polkadot and Serenity have designs around this idea that provide a way for light nodes to be able to be reasonably confident the blocks are available. The Ethereum Serenity approach has a detailed description in 2, which is what? 2 is fraud proofs, maximizing light client security and scaling blockchains with dishonest majorities. Ooh. You know what? I think I'm just going to do a series where I go through Vitalik's blog. Because from what I've heard, Vitalik does a very good job of explaining a lot of these really complex topics, and I probably don't want to read all of Vitalik's blog posts, but definitely probably a great place to kind of start and go through more papers. I had a consensus diligence post to go through, and I wanted to, but there's only so many hours in the day, so not right now. Polkadot's approach to data availability. In Polkadot, like in most sharded solutions, each shard, called the parachain, snapshots its blocks to the beacon chain, called the relay chain. Say there are 2F plus 1 validators on the relay chain. I'm going to call it beacon chain because it's going to confuse me to call it relay chain. The beacon chain. The block producers of the shards, called, oh my gosh, the block producers of the parachain blocks, called collators, block producers, oh my gosh. All these different names for the exact same things is what is the thing that's going to drive me crazy. And I love the experimentation, and I love it all. But in the papers, I really appreciate us all using similar terminology, because it's not necessary for us to call, you know, the relay chain, the beacon chain. I don't care what you call it, but okay. So I'm losing track of something as stupid as wording, because people want to use, and this is, I guess I blame Polkadot for this. I do appreciate the authors of this paper using, you know, shard and parachain. I'm just going to try again. In Polkadot, like in most sharded solutions, each shard snapshots its blocks to the beacon chain. Say there are 2F plus 1 validators in the beacon chain. The block reducers of the shards, once the shard is produced, compute an erasure-coded version of the block that consists of 2F plus 1 parts, such that any F parts are sufficient to reconstruct the block. So you only need half, or a little less than half the code to reconstruct the block. They then distribute one part to each validator on the relay chain. A particular relay chain validator would only sign on a relay chain block if they have their part for each parachain block that is snapshotted to such. So you only need half the data instead of the full data from the block in order to validify that the block is, or that the shard is valid. Therefore, it's less data than needed instead of needing all the data. Thus, if a beacon chain block has signatures from 2F plus 1 validators, and for as long as no more than F of them violated the protocol, each parachain, I hate, every time I see parachain I get really frustrated. Each parachain block can be reconstructed by fetching the parts from the validators that follow the protocol. Sorry, I'm really getting annoyed by all the different terminologies in one paragraph. It's really confusing. Sorry. But there's a figure here which is talking about Polkadot's data availability, which I'm going to admit I understand, but I'm confused because of the way I don't understand. Anyways, relay chain. Okay, so this is the beacon chain on the right-hand side. So if the beacon chain has signatures from 2F plus 1 validators, okay, so you know the beacon chain's honest. So more than 2/3 of the validators are attesting to the beacon chain. And for as long as no more than 1/3 of them are malicious, so as long as no more than 1/3 of the beacon chain validators are malicious, each shard chain block can be reconstructed by fetching the parts from the beacon chain validators. So what you're doing here is you're ensuring that beacon chain validators hold a part of that state. But what I don't understand, say there are 2/3 of validators on the relay chain. Oh, the beacon chain. Okay. No, 2f plus 1 is just saying that as long as no more than half of the nodes violate the protocol. Sorry. I'm so used to using 2/3 and stuff. I think this is saying like a little more like any F parts are sufficient to reconstruct the block, which to me would say that you need a little bit less than half of the validators from the beacon chain to reconstruct the block. So you can go to less than half of the honest validators to reconstruct the block, and that's why it says here less than half of them have to violate the protocol. So no more than half can violate. Okay, that makes sense. Sorry. The whole again, using 2f plus 1, using faulty, or 2m plus 1, okay, anyways. The more I read these papers, the more I get used to the terminology that, different chains. I'm so used to only going through Ethereum terminology. It's been helpful to go through other chains as well. Kind of learn how Polkadot and Cosmos and all Near are doing things. Note that all the approaches discussed above only attest to the fact that a block was published at all and is available now. Blocks that later become unavailable for various reasons, nodes going offline, nodes intentionally erasing historical data, and others. Oh, blocks can later become available for those reasons. A white paper worth mentioning that addresses this issue is Polyshard, which uses erasure codes to make blocks available across shards, even if several shards completely lose their data. That's very cool. Unfortunately, their specific approach requires all the shards to download blocks from all other shards, which kind of makes no sense, because if all shards are downloading data from all other shards, yeah, the overhead on that is insane. The long-term availability is not as pressing of an issue, since no participant in the system is expected to be capable of validating all the chains in all the shards. The security of the sharded protocol needs to be designed in such a way that the system is secure, even if some old blocks in some shards become completely unavailable. I agree with this, and I agree with this whole ending part. But this is kind of where the whole archive node comes into play. I understand that no validator should truly be able to kind of go through and look at everything that's needed. As long as every individual has their state and they can validate it, I guess there's not really a need for everyone else. If you're a light client and you can validate everything, but what if your data is on some node that completely just goes offline and it's only there? Then you got to think about, okay, well, you want your data to be held by at least 10% of the nodes in the system at one time. Therefore, but here they're talking about how you only need half the nodes to attest to the data, and you would assume that you would not have more than half the beacon chain nodes coming down at the exact same time and never coming back online, which would be the only you'd actually lose all that data. But still, it could be possible, and so these are things to think about. That's all for today. Got through chapters 1 and 2. I'll be going through chapters, let's see. I think it might end with Nightshade. Yeah, honestly, it's just Nightshade and then conclusion. And I'll probably go through that maybe Sunday or Monday. But thank you, everyone who might have followed along or read some of this. Sorry my dog was going absolutely wild for most of this. But yeah, if you want to read the paper yourself, feel free. If you have comments, concerns, anything to say about the paper, please feel free to leave them in the comments section. And yeah, if you have any papers you think I should read, please feel free to leave them in the comments as well. I try and have them be blockchain specific. These days, I'm really enjoying consensus algorithm stuff. My research focus has been slowly shifting towards ETH2 most recently, and so kind of any papers that have to do with ETH2 economics, governance, data availability, cross-shard transactions, all that kind of stuff, I find very interesting. But that's all for me for today. I'm going to go take the dog out because I'm sure she's sleeping, but I'm sure she really, really, really wants to go. But yeah, that's all for me, Chloethedev. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend and a wonderful Halloween. Oh, and I'm probably going to go live a bit later in Decentraland for a quick second because I want to get my outfit on. But